The movie begins with young Carl Fredricksen in a theater watching his idol Charles Muntz, an explorer, emerge from his giant blimp with his pack of dogs. The Explorer Association realizes that Charles's recent discovery of the skeleton of an endangered bird is fake, and they remove him from the Explorer Guild. Charles announces that he will return to a place called Paradise Falls and find the bird. He promises to return with the bird alive and leaves in his blimp. Carl walks on the street while imagining being an explorer. He hears a girl's voice from inside an abandoned house and steps in to see who it is. He sees a girl named Ellie, and she welcomes him to the Adventurers Club. Ellie gives him a makeshift badge, and they go to the next floor to retrieve his balloon. Carl falls from a plank and breaks his arm. That night, Ellie enters his room through the window and shows him her adventure book. She tells him she's going to Paradise Falls and will write her adventures in her book. Ellie makes Carl promise to take them to Paradise Falls, and she tells him she likes him as she leaves the room. Years pass and Ellie and Carl get married. They return to the abandoned house, rebuilding it and making it their home. Carl gets a job selling balloons while Ellie works as a tour guide at a zoo. They attempt to have a child, but Ellie has a miscarriage. Carl reminds her of her desire to go to Paradise Falls, and they begin saving for their adventure. The couple is constantly forced to spend their savings on necessities in the house. Ellie and Carl grow old together as they live their lives. Carl sees a picture of Ellie as a young girl and decides to take her on the trip to Paradise Falls. Ellie falls ill on the day Carl plans to surprise her. He takes her to the hospital and she gives him her adventure book. She dies and Carl is left alone as he returns to his house. Carl wakes up one morning and cleans up the house. He walks outside, sits down, and watches as the town around him is being renovated. He walks to his mail, and as a construction worker reminds him of the offer their boss gave him for his house, Carl refuses the offer and returns to his home. Later, Carl hears a knock on his door and sees a young boy who's a wilderness explorer named Russell. Russell offers to help Carl so he can receive his last badge and get promoted to the next level of wilderness explorers. Carl isn't interested and sends Russell on a wild goose chase to make him leave his house. Carl sees a bulldozer run over his mailbox and rushes to it. A construction worker tries helping him, but Carl hits him with his walker and injures him. He sees the other workers stare at him and he rushes back to his house with the mailbox. Carl gets summoned to court and gets tagged as a public menace. The court asks him to relocate to an assisted living facility and he packs his belongings. Carl sees Ellie's adventure book in the closet and he holds it. He looks at Ellie's picture and the painting they made of Paradise Falls and gets an idea. Workers from the facility arrive the following day and wait for Carl to leave the house. A shadow covers them and they watch as thousands of balloons emerge from behind the house and lift it into the air. The townspeople watch as the house floats out of the city and Carl uses some ropes attached to clothes to direct the house. He suddenly hears a knock on the door, and as he opens it, he realizes that Russell is in the house. He lets Russell enter and thinks of a way to send Russell home. Carl decides to end his trip and tries cutting the balloons. The house eventually enters a storm, and Carl runs around while trying to prevent his items from getting damaged. Carl later wakes up, and Russell informs him he maneuvered out of the storm. They float above the clouds, and Carl cuts some balloons so they can descend. To Carl's surprise, they quickly get to the ground, and he and Russell hang on to the house from a water hose. The fog clears and Carl realizes they are on a mountain beside Paradise Falls. Russell cannot climb the rope and suggests they can walk to the falls with the house like a balloon. They begin their journey and Carl informs Russell they have 3 days to get to the falls or the helium in the balloons will leak out. Meanwhile, some dogs chase a giant flightless bird through the woods, but run away as they hear Carl adjusting his hearing aid. Russell walks into the woods, uses the bathroom, and comes across the bird, which he calls Kevin. He realizes that Kevin loves chocolate and takes her to Carl. They continue their journey as Carl tries chasing Kevin away. They meet a dog named Doug and realize he can talk using a special collar. Russell convinces Carl to let Doug travel with them. Meanwhile, the alpha dog talks to the others, and they wonder where Kevin is. They make fun of Doug because they sent him on a mission alone and realize their master will punish them if he finds out. Alpha uses the screen on the other dog's collar to view Doug, and they realize Doug is with Kevin and Russell. Later, Carl and the others camp under the house as it rains, and Russell tries setting up a tent. He fails to set up the tent, and confesses to Carl that he doesn't know how to do it. Carl asks Russell why his dad didn't teach him and realizes that his parents aren't together anymore. Carl tells Russell to get some sleep so he'll have energy for the journey. The following morning, Russell wakes up and sees Kevin on the roof with Carl's food. They hear as it calls out to its children, and realize that Kevin is a female. Doug informs them that Kevin is gathering food for her children and she runs away. Shortly after, Alpha and the other dogs arrive and ask Doug for Kevin. The dogs forcefully take Carl and the others to a large cave, and more dogs meet them on the way. They arrive at the cave entrance and a pack of dogs surrounds them. The leader of the dogs stops the dogs and laughs as he realizes that Carl and Russell are traveling in a floating house. The leader of the dogs emerges from the cave and Carl recognizes him as Charles, his childhood hero. Carl talks to him and says that he loved him as a child. Charles tells the dogs that Carl and Russell aren't their enemies and welcomes them to his house. A giant blimp he calls the Spirit of Adventure. The dogs punish Doug by placing a cone of shame on him. Charles takes Carl and Russell around his fossil museum while the dogs serve them drinks. Alpha announces that dinner is ready and Charles fixes his translator. Carl and Russell walk into the dining room and sit with Charles. Charles talks about how he was called a fraud and has spent a lifetime searching for the animal while eliminating other adventurers who have come in search of it. Carl sees a skeleton resembling Kevin and realizes that Charles is searching for Kevin. Russell sees the skeleton and talks about how they are friends with Kevin and he trained it to follow them. Carl sees Kevin in his house. They try to leave, but Charles tries to stop them. He sees Kevin in the house and Carl and Russell try to escape. The dogs begin to pursue them and Doug shows them a route they can use to escape. Kevin runs on some rocks with Carl and Russell on her back. They jump across a cliff, but Alpha bites Kevin's leg. Russell and the others narrowly escape, but Kevin is injured due to the bite and cannot walk to her home. Russell convinces Carl to help Kevin return to her home, but he tells them that they have to hurry. Meanwhile, the dogs return to Charles and inform him they couldn't capture Kevin and the others. They inform him that Doug is helping them, and Charles uses Doug's tracker to locate him. That night, Carl and Russell drag the house into the woods while Kevin rests. Russell talks about how he did a lot of boring activities with his dad and says he misses those. They hear Kevin's children from a distance, but Charles appears in the blimp. He captures Kevin as she tries to run, but puts a fire beneath Carl's house. Carl is forced to choose between Kevin and his house, and he rushes to save the house. The dogs drag Kevin into the blimp and fly away while Carl puts out the fire that's under his house. Russell walks to Carl and asks him why he let Charles capture Kevin. Carl yells at him and tells Doug to stop calling him master. He blames Doug for their situation and calls him a bad dog. He then tells Russell that he must go to Paradise Falls even if it kills him. Carl continues his journey to Paradise Falls and arrives just as the house stops floating. Russell walks to him, drops his adventure buttons on the floor, and walks away. Carl enters his house and sits on his chair. He opens Ellie's adventure book and realizes that she put pictures of their time together. He sees a note from her, thanking him for the adventure and asks him to go on a new one. Carl walks out of the house to find Russell and sees him floating away with some balloons. He rushes back into the house and removes several heavy objects to make the house lighter. He hears a knock on the door and sees Doug. Carl is happy as he calls Doug a good boy, and they follow Russell to Charles's blimp. Russell enters the blimp through a window and gets abducted by the dog. Charles realizes Carl will come after Russell and instructs Alpha to guard Kevin. Carl sees as Russell's about to fall out of the blimp and quickly saves him. He places Russell in the house and enters the blimp. Doug points at a vent and they use it to get to Kevin's cage. Carl uses a ball on his walker to make the dogs leave the room, and he then locks them out. They report their situation to Charles, who watches as Russell slides on the windscreen and swings from the house. He sends some dogs and airplanes to attack Russell with darts, and he cannot climb back into the house. In the blimp, Carl searches for a way to escape with Kevin, and Charles ambushes him. Doug tries attacking him, but he gets kicked out of the room and chased by Alpha and the other dogs. Carl defends himself with his walker while Charles attacks him with a sword. Alpha and the others chase Doug to the control room, and he tilts the ship. Carl crawls out of the blimp with Kevin and climbs a ladder to the top. Doug puts the collar of shame on Alpha's neck and traps him in the steering wheel. The other dogs take Doug as their Alpha and obey his commands. Russell distracts the dogs in the airplane by saying there are squirrels around. Carl reunites with Doug, and Russell moves the house on top of the blimp. Charles emerges and shoots the balloons. Carl tries to save Russell and the others in the house, and Charles walks inside. Carl instructs Russell to hang on to Kevin and attracts Kevin using chocolate. Charles jumps out of the window as he pursues Kevin but gets stuck to some balloons and falls out of the house. The water hose separates from the house and Kevin and the others get back on the blimp. Carl watches as the house floats to the ground and Russell apologizes. He tells Russell it's just a house, and they take Kevin to her children. Carl and Russell get on the blimp and return to the city. Later, Russell receives his final badge and Carl decides to stand with him on the stage. He gets promoted to senior adventurer, and Carl gives him his makeshift badge, which he calls the Ellie badge. They celebrate, and Carl sits outside an ice cream shop with Russell as the blimp floats above them. Carl's house lands beside Paradise Falls and resembles the painting Carl and Ellie made. The end. Thank you so much for watching. Check out these other videos and make sure to subscribe and tap that bell to be notified about our latest videos. We'll see you next time.